All right, welcome everybody to our second Education and Development Career Panel. I'm excited to have 6 panelists today working across international and regional organizations with an emphasis on education and development. This is a CEID Community at Moray House event. My name is Will Smith. I coordinate the Comparative Education and International Development Community here at Moray House in the University of Edinburgh. If you're following along with us or want more information, you can see the website there, or you can connect with us on Twitter or tweet about this event by looking at Moray House CEID. So I'm really excited for today's event. I think we're going to have an amazing conversation. Why do we put these together? So the aim of the career panels are to expose students and other interested individuals to a wide variety of work in education and development that is being done by those currently positioned in international or regional organizations. It provides a space for panelists to share their career journey, advice and challenges, and for students and other interested individuals to ask questions related to current occupations, the career path, to those experts that are working in the field. We have a very basic structure to today's panel. So I've invited each panelist to have 7 or 8 minutes to share their initial welcome, which includes what are they currently working on, so their current position, as well as the highlights edition of their career journey, as many of our panelists have quite a career journey explained. And then once we've heard from our 6 panelists, we're going to open it up to you. So please feel free to add questions as they come to you in the chat box or hold them until the end. Either way is fine. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can with the time we have available. Hopefully this is a fairly laid back, constructive conversation for everyone in the room. So at this point, I'd like to just briefly introduce all of our panelists, and then I'll be calling them up one at a time to share their journey. We have quite a diverse group of panelists today, starting with Huacong Liu. She's a former research associate at the Unesco's Institute for Lifelong Learning and was in a dual position with UNESCO UIL and the University of Hamburg. Second, we have Anjela Taneja, who's currently the lead campaigner for Inequality and the lead specialist for essential services at Oxfam, India. We also have Rosa Vidarte, who's currently an economist at UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. Fourth, we have Tony Baker, who's currently a senior advisor for external engagement and education at World Vision International. And then we have Anya Nielsen, who's a senior policy advisor for education and youth at the UK Committee for Unicef. And finally, we have Sebastian Hein, who's a program specialist at UNESCO's International Institute for Education Planning, or the IIEP. So I want to really thank all of our panelists for joining us today. I'm excited to hear about them, their stories, and share their insights and advice with all of our participants today. So I want to start by inviting Huacong up. I think Huacong, you have some slides you're going to guide through, and reminder to each of our panelists that we have about 7 or 8 minutes to present before we move to the next person. So Huacong, it's over to you.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Will, for having me on this career panel. Like Will said, I was a research associate at UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, UIL. It's a joint post with the University of Hamburg. For those of you who may not know, UIL is located in Hamburg, Germany, and it is one of the 7 UNESCO education institutes. It's also the only education institute that primarily focuses on adult education and lifelong learning. UIL has 3 major policy and research focuses, including lifelong learning, adult education, literacy, and basic skills. So under each of the programs, a wide range of activities are carried out, including capacity development, technical support to member states, monitor member states' progress against commitment on adult learning and education. UIL also undertakes population-specific actions for instance, on women, migrants, refugees, and indigenous population. It also conducts region-specific actions such as RAMA, action research. It measures literacy program participants' learning outcomes in 12 French-speaking countries in Africa. It intends to improve adult literacy education through developing assessment tools, monitoring, and working with country policymakers and adult education practitioners through action research. So all in all, with the focus on adult education and lifelong learning, UIL's work covers a wide range of areas, including policy advice, capacity development, research, monitoring, networking, and advocacy. Specifically, so my role as a research associate is a joint post between UIL and the University of Hamburg. It was created to facilitate knowledge transferring from the university to the institute. So my work primarily falls under the umbrella of advancing the work of SDG 4.6. As you may all well acknowledge, the ambitious goals set out by SDG 4 include a set of learning indicators. So to advance the work of global benchmarking and measuring of learning indicators, UNESCO Institute for Statistics, or UIS, led the creation of Global Alliance to Monitor Learning, as known as GALMO. So UIL is mandated to chair the task force of Indicator 4.6, which concerns youth and adult literacy and numeracy. Specifically, SDG Indicator 4.6 is defined as percentage of population in a given age group achieving at least a fixed level proficiency in functional literacy and numeracy. So interpreting the indicator or defining functional literacy and numeracy across cultural contexts, identifying existing data that can be used to quantify the indicator, or exploring options of data coverage in lower middle or low-income countries, exploring the global comparability of data from different sources are daunting tasks. So these tasks cannot be accomplished by any single institution or agency. So the work has to draw experiences, expertise, and wisdoms, not only from other UNESCO agencies, but also from other international organizations, from experts, from decision makers involved in national and cross-national learning assessment initiatives. So as you can imagine, it has been quite an exciting learning experience for me. As for my PhD training, I studied higher education with a focus on economics of education, primarily using secondary data to evaluate policy. So at the job, I learned how assessment data was collected, what are the differences among existing national and international assessments, how to empower member states to have their own assessment, as well as involving in debates about pros and cons of large-scale assessment. So in a way, the nature of the work is very different than working in academia. So you come with your own expertise in a certain area, but the breadth of the tasks would definitely and always take you beyond your initial expertise. So keeping an open mind and willing to learn is essential. So how did I get here? During my PhD study at Penn State, I was interested in how skills are developed and evolved during the life cycle, how education policy can mitigate or exacerbate initial skill inequality due to growing up in different family backgrounds. I was also interested in how education policy results in different skill distribution across countries. So at the third year of my doctoral study, the PIAC data, or the Survey of Adult Skills, were released by the OECD. I was really fascinated by the breadth of information collected by the survey and wanted to do some research using the data. So through Will, I got to know the Thomas J. Alexandra Fellowship at the OECD. So at my fourth year, I applied to the TJ Fellowship program, proposing to use the PIAC data to study the long-term consequences of delay in tracking age on adult skills. So luckily, I was selected as one of the 3 fellows of that year. So upon graduating from Penn State in summer 2017, I took the fellowship and worked for 6 months in Paris, OECD headquarters. Upon completing my fellowship project, I stayed in Paris and worked for UNESCO GEM report as a consultant. That's when Will, Sebastian, Rosa, also on this panel, and I spent some time together at the GEM report team. So the experiences at OECD and the GEM report introduced me to the work of international organizations in ways that I didn't know back in graduate school. Well, I was fascinated by how international organizations are shaping the global education policy making. At the same time, I also wanted to have some time and space to conduct independent research. In spring 2018, an opportunity arose to work between a university and UNESCO. So I applied and got the job and moved to Hamburg, Germany in June 2018. So that's about it, my education and short journey working at 3 international organizations. I think I'm going to stop here and can take some questions after each of us has a chance to talk.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thanks, Huacong, for getting us started. I now want to invite up Anjela for sharing her experience and initial advice. So, Anjela, the floor is yours.
In a lot of ways, I'm the wrong person to give career advice because I certainly didn't have a career trajectory. In fact, when I was looking at, was wondering what to say, once again ended up by wondering how did I end up with such a meandering career, but it sort of has so far worked out reasonably well in the end anyway. Who am I? Every time I end up having a slightly different introduction. I am the advocacy lead for Oxfam India. I also happen to be the inequality campaign lead. I also do the technical stuff related to education, health, and inequality for Oxfam in India. What do we do on education? More specifically, we work on issues of inequality. In terms of unequal quality of education, unequal access to education, available to marginalized communities and the poor versus that's available to the rich. Therefore, the work is broadly on 3 dimensions. One is the work on social accountability, which is working with communities to strengthen their voice as part of statutory processes available to them for ensuring government schools work better. We work also with networks and alliances, both within the country and at the global level, to make make the state more accountable, but at the same time also work on specific solutions to the more knotty problems of development, be it how to ensure children are retained in school, a particularly critical question on the back of the COVID pandemic. Also, how does the question of instruction in the mother tongue gets addressed? How do you realize the right to education in its totality more broadly? Also, given in a lot of countries, the private sector is beginning to become a fairly significant provider. There is also the question of regulation of the private sector, be it in terms of regulation of private schools, but also again in a COVID context, the question of technology providers also is becoming to be a problematic issue, given the digital divide and all the other things that probably people are aware of. At the same time, there's also the role of the World Bank and other international financial institutions which have been pushing for a pro-privatization agenda. How did I end up being here? complicated. I did a master's in child development and an MPhil degree, which is something between a master's and a PhD that's there in India in educational studies, it's an interdisciplinary course with sociology, education, and economics of education. While with the complete full intention of doing a PhD and continuing in what's effectively our family occupation. Both my parents were in academia. I grew up on campus. Until I finished my degree and started again, I thought a teaching assistantship, a temporary teaching position might help if one has to eventually move to the global north for in one of the better institutions. It would help with fellowships, etc. So ended up teaching and realized to my surprise, if it might be a family occupation, it isn't what really floats my boat. Teaching isn't really my thing. I don't have the patience for it. Therefore, while I was doing my studies, I was earning part-time as a technical monitoring and evaluation officer. Often countries, smaller NGOs in the global south need people who can write reports in English and do basic number crunching. And by the time I was in my second year of academia, I realized I was enjoying that part-time work better than what I was doing now, which I thought was what I was intending to do, to spend of the rest of my life doing. So from there, moved to a technical as a monitoring and research position in one of the larger NGOs in the country that worked with teachers on pedagogy issues. Subs- Subsequently realized it's been 4 years of doing monitoring and evaluation and finding gaps in other people's programs, at which point one got a bit of an itch of, I want to actually do stuff on my own rather than find fault in other people's work and make suggestions which may or may not be implemented. Hence the move to a program position in ActionAid in India, of which was useful in learning how to get things hands dirty, do it yourself. You don't have the luxury of a technical team sometimes to help you out. So therefore, plus at the same time, understanding how starting at the bottom in an INGO in the global south really gives a decent perspective on how this development sector machine actually works. And therefore, when you come to the top of in the hierarchy, helps you to understand the little guy, and therefore also helps you to in the long run also manage bureaucracies slightly better. From actually it moved to Oxfam in India as they were starting an education portfolio in the country. So was a good learning experience both in terms of working with networks and alliances, uh, and at the same time learning how to do reports in a collaborative way across networks. No one is in charge, but you still get work done. The combination of being able to write reports collaboratively and collaborating with networks and alliances took me to the Global Campaign for Education, which is the world's largest education network, as its head of policy at a time when the SDG negotiations were ongoing, which was by itself probably once in a lifetime opportunity to get the bigger landscape of how education policy gets done and how education networks happen across the pretty much 100 countries. At which point organizations go through things called restructurings, and after a point it became it's better to just, instead of relocating, preferred to stay within country for family reasons, and returned to Oxfam in a slightly or circuitous route versus through care. So that's my journey and where I am now, from do education, health, and inequality, also leading on advocacy across the organizations. In terms of if one have to say what I learned through this, one is you don't really need a career path. What you need is a sense of trajectory and a sense of destination. Where do you want to be? Because this certainly isn't a career path that sounds logical, but in the long run, one ends up picking up skill sets as one goes along, which one finds useful in the long run. Second thing that I learned probably the hard way is finding out what motivates you, what makes you enjoy your work is critical. That may not be a better paid job, that may not be a traditionally a more valued job, but in the end, one has to be loyal to oneself and do what one enjoys rather than necessarily what is prestigious, because you may be earning a lot of money, but ultimately one has to wake up in the morning and enjoy the look forward to the day ahead, which basically means not necessary to please the bosses, but doing what one enjoys and what is meaningful, because it may not be your next career step, may not be in the organization, it may be outside. So therefore, don't be in a rush. Do take time to explore. Your first job from university may not be what you end up doing. So therefore, in the beginning, it seemed like it was important to be the top person who earned the most in the batch, which at one level I did. But in the long run, it doesn't really matter. Because one's life takes you in unknown and unanticipated directions. But having said so, the last point, if you have to change jobs in the long run, do so strategically. As I've been telling everyone in their career discussions, look at yes, change your job if you have to, but look at the prospects that that job gives you, not only immediately, but also where can you move from that job, because the career is something that one builds over several decades. So therefore, keep the long game in mind. So that's my whatever number 10 minutes of wisdom.
Thanks, Anjela. I really appreciate your sharing what is a meandering career, but I think it's important for everyone to see that there's not really one set approach to getting into this field. There's a variety of opportunities and experiences. So really appreciate you sharing. Rosa, your turn now?
Sure. Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this career panel. I am honored to share my professional path with you, and I hope you find this information useful. I am Rosa Vidarte. I am Peruvian, and my academic training includes a bachelor in economics and a master in economics and public policy from Princeton University. I am currently an economist at UNHCR in Lebanon, and I'm based in Beirut. Within UNHCR, I work mostly at the Interagency Coordination Unit, which coordinates the work of 10 sectors, including education, health, protection, and others, of the Lebanon Crisis Response Plan. We call it here LCRP. So this LCRP is a joint multi-year plan between the government of Lebanon and international and national partners, and it had a combined budget of 1.2 billion USD in 2020. This economist position is relatively new in UNHCR and was designed to produce quantitative analysis using the abundant data that UNHCR produces. And I support the LCRP sectors and UNHCR analytically, working with academics and other international organizations like UN agencies and the World Bank. In education in particular, I am working on further improving data collection on education of refugees in Lebanon. Before, I worked as researcher at the Global Education Monitoring Report in Unesco Paris, and that's where I met Will and Huacong and Sebastian. I worked there for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. The Joint Report, I produced education indicators to monitor SDG 4 from more than 1,000 household surveys and large-scale learning assessments from all countries and all years available. I also coordinated the 2020 Latin America Regional Report about inclusion and education. Before the GEM report, I worked at the World Bank, analyzing the labor market and education in different countries like Tunisia and Sierra Leone, but based in Washington, D.C. I also did an internship in the education section of the regional South Asia office of Unicef in Thailand. And there I analyzed early childhood policies across the region. A key moment in my career, I will say, was 11 years ago, in 2010, when I got a job as a research fellow at the research department of the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. This was a very competitive position and my first professional experience outside of my home country. I was very lucky to have worked together with a fantastic supervisor who believed in me, gave me opportunities, and inspired me to do rigorous research applying various quantitative methods. I remember vividly that when I was just 23 years old, I was already running an experiment in Costa Rica to assess the relationship between participating in a music orchestra and math achievement. The IDB allowed me to have a great community full of young, talented people supported by some of the most important economists in the region. Also, it made it possible for me to get into grad school in the US. And a more recent pivotal moment was getting my current job at UNHCR in Lebanon. The UNHCR operation in Lebanon is one of the biggest, and there are 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, making it the country with the highest rate of refugees per capita. Right now, Lebanon is going through overlapping crises, including political, economic crisis, the COVID-19 related restrictions, and all of this was compounded by the Beirut blast in August 2020 that left much of the city in ruins and 200 people, unfortunately, dead. This is Lebanon's worst crisis in the last decades. So currently 89% of the Syrian refugees are extremely poor. Here I have found that the work that I do can be meaningful and the analysis I perform is needed for programming. So there is the potential of having real impact on the people in need. Also, this institution is more open to changes and innovation than other UN agencies. And I feel I can express my ideas and that my voice is heard. As you can see, I've worked in various international organizations, the IDB, the World Bank, UNICEF, UNESCO, UNHCR. All of them have pros and cons. When I was mostly focused on developing quantitative analysis skills, the IDB and the World Bank were a great choice. I am currently applying many of those skills that I developed there in my current work. Currently, I think UNHCR is a good fit because I want to work more on the development humanitarian nexus. And I also want more country experience. Even though I always say that I already come from a developing country, I have 23 years of experience living in a developing country, but I think it's good to go to other places and see other situations, other realities. After these years of working internationally in development and education, these will be my main takeaways. Choose a good supervisor over an institution. Mentors are key to your success. I have had the luck to have had mentors at the beginning of my career that proved key for my career later on, and to whom even now I revert to them when deciding next steps. They are a great source for information and also for advice. If you are a woman and a person of color, take a look at how diverse is the institution and the department you are aiming to work at. You don't want to work really in a sexist and non-diverse workplace. Also, avoid at all costs places that have lots of people from the same university. This denotes that they try to avoid diversity. Before accepting a position, ask people working there and see how they feel about that place. I mean, there is so much really you can do to change a place. You can voice your concern, but there is really limits, particularly in these big institutions like the UN or the World Bank. So yeah, it's better to ask first before accepting the positions. Then attend presentations, workshops, and courses, not only to develop your skills, but also to create a network. From one course that I took on multidimensional poverty, when I was in my first job, I ended up getting another job at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. So I got access to a network in the UK that I wouldn't have had just having been working in a Peruvian institution. When choosing a job, see how young professionals are doing in that institution. There are institutions that are very skewed towards giving preference to older colleagues with no clear plan or opportunities for younger people. Not that older colleagues don't have anything to add, but the institution needs a clear path for young professionals to develop, and some institutions like that. Or they have it in paper and they really don't act on it. So it's good also to consult with people around your age and around the same years of experience to see how are these plans and if they actually implement them. Also, I will say, go and see the world. Having spent most of my career in headquarters, so I was either in Washington or in Paris, I have to say that the real change happens in country offices. If you are interested in producing analysis, hoping that it improves the life of the people that need it, I feel like more meaningful work happens in the country offices than in headquarters. If you want to dedicate yourself to purely research or more theoretical work, then the location is not much important. But I think applied research needs to be has to be closer to the country. Also be familiar with quantitative methods. Not that you have to be a statistician, but having a solid quantitative base to be able to analyze the evidence will give you many advantages, particularly in the education field, that those kind of skills are sometimes in demand and there are not enough people that know them. So I think that's it, and I hope you find this information useful, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rosa. I really appreciate some of the advice, especially for those that are younger and just getting into the workforce about, almost interviewing or staking out their institution. So is this a good space for you? Is it diverse? Does it care about young people? And then given the multiple international organizations you've worked for, really being able to recognize that they have different foci and you're able to get different skills and focus and hone different abilities depending on where you're at. So some good stuff. Thank you very much. Tony, I want to invite you up to now share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Will. Hello, everyone. Good to be on our meeting today with you all. I'm Tony Baker. I'm the Senior Advisor for External Engagement and Education at World Vision International. And as I begin here, I'm laughing at my picture here on the screen. Clearly, I have fully embraced the stay-at-home COVID lifestyle over here in Washington, D.C. Well overdue for a haircut from my usual appearance there. But very, very happy to be on. As I said, I'm with World Vision. World Vision is an international humanitarian aid, development, and advocacy organization. It's quite large. We're operating in about 70 countries with 37,000 staff around the world. And I sit in the World Vision International, which is a bit of the International Secretariat or Global Center in relation to all of the other country offices that act together as a bit of a federation structure that we operate in. So I'm in our global center seeking to advise strategies and approaches and coordination across our offices in the education sector. I am specifically with our education team. That's a team that's led by the global lead for the education sector, alongside our programs lead, the quality and innovation advisor, alongside our research and monitoring staff member, a communication staff member, and then myself on external engagement. And yeah, I think that brings us to the question of what is external engagement. That is also one of those kind of ambiguous terms. I hear, you know, it's almost like a special advisor type of role that can mean a lot of different things. But for us, it is a bit of a mix of policy advocacy and our relationship management with key partners in the space. So we work closely with organizations, institutions like the Global Partnership for Education, Education Cannot Wait, civil society networks, and the like. So I really help facilitate our engagement with those groups, and again, it's quite related to our policy advocacy work as well. And I've been in that position for just over a year. I'll come back to how I got there. But what we're currently working on, number one, in a role like this, step one is effectively developing the plan. You know, you're brought into a role of coordinated kind of higher level nature, and there's a lot of actors and functions within that, and establishing our external engagement plan is the number one task, which immediately got dashed to the side due to COVID-19. Again, I joined World Vision in January last year. 2 months later, COVID hit in full force on our side. So much of my last year was simply hitting the ground running and all of our kind of COVID response work that needed to be conducted. So we're circling back to planning. You know, within education, our priorities of our work are really oriented around education in emergencies, early childhood development, literacy, girls' education, and inclusive education. With COVID-19 and all of those developments last year, we were greatly focused on remote learning, or ensuring the continued learning of children as they were out of school. And then one additional specific area that we were looking closely into was the relationship between school closures and increased teenage pregnancy, and particularly the intersection of teenage pregnancy with policies and practices in many countries. And we were looking closely at Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, that exclude pregnant girls and young mothers from entering school. And so we had learned, and the global community had seen those impacts, things like the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone, where schools were closed for 8 months and 11,000 schoolgirls became pregnant, sought to return after schools opened, only to be met by the country's policy barring their inclusion in school. And that policy has since changed, and there's other countries across Africa and elsewhere that are changing those policies. So we've been doing some deeper work in that regard, and we're actually looking at more concrete advocacy engagement in Zimbabwe, DRC, and Uganda with some programs that we're putting together. And this connects as well with World Vision. We have a wider campaign on child marriage and school-related gender-based violence that you can see the clear connections there as well. Otherwise, as I mentioned, a lot of what I do is maintaining our relationships with rather key partners, Global Partnership for Education. I've been on the board of GPE and in different committees over the last 6 or 7 years. Education Cannot Wait. We're deepening, as World Vision, we're deepening our engagement there, and have recently joined into their board structure, the high-level steering group and executive committee. We work closely with World Bank, UNICEF, UNESCO, UNHCR, and others. And a lot of that is around strategic priorities in the space, from what we see from our side, what we're learning from communities on the ground, and then, of course, mobilizing the resources needed to support that work. And in addition to that, we do a lot of engagement and around supporting civil society, very close partners with networks like the Global Campaign for Education and INAE and ECDAN as the Early Childhood Development Network. Those global networks, that's a lot of what we do, particularly on my side as well. So how did I get here? The fun part of the discussion, kind of that journey. I think my journey really starts in Tanzania. Before that, let me say, in university, I studied philosophy and religious studies, and from there joined Peace Corps, a U.S. government program that sends out volunteers to different countries to help with development projects. So I landed in Tanzania directly after university, and that, of course, was an entirely grounding experience for me. That was 2 years living in a village in the northern part of Tanzania, working mostly on agricultural and forestry programs at the time, but deep community, just love my friends and community members there, still in touch with them today. This is going on about 18 years ago at this point, but living in the village, just being side by side with close friends there that became friends in the village there. And as many of you, I think, have had some types of those experiences, you go into that with a lot of questions about development, and after 2 years of living in different contexts, you only get more questions about development and global economy structures and power structures, etc. So that's what put me back into grad school, and I went to a graduate-specific, development-specific graduate institute in Vermont called the School for International Training, and where I pursued my master's in sustainable development with a focus on policy analysis and advocacy. And among different phases of that, I took that and combined it with the socio-cultural linguistic skills that I gathered in Tanzania, and I went back to Tanzania, went back to country, and landed in Dar es Salaam and worked with a national civil society organization called Haki Elemu that was working on democracy and education rights. A very prominent national CSO, looking at, really focused on government accountability, World Bank program accountability, national plans in education, and getting that information out to citizens, really with the philosophy that only through empowered, educated citizenry can you really have government accountability and drive progress towards goals like a healthy, robust education system that's open and free and quality for all. So did a lot of type of accountability work there. This was 40 Tanzanians and myself, a Swahili office environment. I was working in the policy unit as technical support behind the scenes. A lot of the laws and policies in Tanzania are in English, but government implementation reports are in Swahili. So kind of being that person to put that together and provide reports on the exact status, policy versus practice issues, as we know, and getting that accountability out to citizen groups. We also worked on, as my first exposure and experience as well, with thinking back to the specific issue of teenage pregnancy and exclusion from schools. That's a major issue in Tanzania, and it was, more than 10 years ago whenever I was with Haki Elemu. And in my own reflections and career, it's amazing that I'm still working on this issue today and in different iterations. But after Haki Elemu, I was there in Tanzania at that time for another 3 years with Haki Elemu. Came back to the U.S. in Washington and worked with Results Educational Fund for a good, I think, 7 or 8 years. And they're a similar kind of oversight, independent civil society engagement, really looking at global level at this point, looking at World Bank programs, GPE, USAID support in education. And out of there also started a separate project called the Right to Education Index. That is another means of assessing the policy landscape and in relation to obligations on the right to education and the current outcomes and the status of realization of the right to education. And I mentioned that because I'm guessing perhaps in your class reading the book Grading Goal 4, you might be familiar with that one. That program is also highlighted there, and a lot of some of this work was the first time that myself and Will had a chance to work together with the Right to Education Index, and also some of our research on World Bank investments in schools in South Africa, Uganda, and Kenya. So that's part of our connection there as well. And since then, that's when I moved over to World Vision in January of last year, and really carrying on similar functions, engaging those stakeholders, GPE and ECW and the World Bank, and also driving our policy advocacy initiatives. I think maybe three, as I closed here, 3 lessons learned along the way that stand out for me. And it's a very interesting panel because you can hear everyone's different career paths and different stories. You know, and I think on my side, I'm originally from Missouri in the Midwest US, family of small farmers in the Midwest, and have somehow came through to arrive at where I'm at. And I think 3 things stand out, as you heard from other panelists. One is the in-country experience. It's just extremely rich and valuable, and if your career is oriented around driving real positive impact and benefits for everyone, that kind of experience and knowing those perspectives is just absolutely key. And I think for me, I recall at some point between Peace Corps and grad school, I was working in New York City for a bit, and had gone around and was talking with different organizations. And I remember it was a colleague at Oxfam International in New York who said, go back to the country level, go back to working with communities. You know, step one, just really focus on getting that real experience. Not everyone can do that, but if you can, do that, you know, and not in terms of a 3-week or 3-month visit. If you can, do the deep experience, go there for a year or 2 or 5, and really learn from folks that are all caught up in some way with the development structure around the world. Number 2, I think focusing on knowledge, experience, and hard work. Of course, you know, knowledge from your education and skill sets, experience from hopefully some robust in-country experience, but then the hard work side. A lot of this is, you know, if you have that and if you're doing what you love, the hard work just comes naturally. It does present work-life balance risks, but a lot of times if you have those elements, it's almost a matter of just letting your career come to you at that point. If you have that experience, you're knowledgeable on the topic and you're showing up and you're contributing, the career will come to you in effect. I kind of think about it. I think one of the early swimmers of the English Channel, I think, had her first attempt to swim. She failed it. It was a clear sunny day, perfect conditions, but she didn't make it. And I'm loosely paraphrasing the anecdote I'm thinking of. But on the second attempt is actually worse conditions. It was cloudy, rainy, couldn't see the other side of the channel, but she completed it. And her takeaway was that actually on the first attempt, you can see where you're going, and you're just getting so exhausted because you can see it, and it looks so far away. And in development issues and all the problems and issues out there, that's definitely can have that impact. But she was saying, whenever it was cloudy, I couldn't see where I was going, so I just kept going, and you got there and didn't get exhausted. So it is a bit interesting, you know, looking at that destination, but also knowing that if you just take it one day at a time and you have that knowledge, experience, and you're applying it and you're showing up, really your career can come to you in that way. And then number three, something I've completely failed at, so do want to flag. That's a great approach for making impact that I myself can't believe that I'm in the positions that I'm in and have that honor to do so. But watch out for the work-life balance. You know, as we're all in the development space, I imagine we're all here with some element of our hearts are in this, and we're doing a good job of taking our passions and building our careers out of that. Watch out, because at the same time, when you're doing what you love, it's really easy to keep doing a lot of work. So do take care of yourselves, especially in development context, and just the travesties and heartbreak that are in our space all the time. Try to take care of yourselves out there. But yeah, those are kind of the three takeaways I thought I would offer to the group here. And thank you for having me, and looking forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks, Tony. As someone who's worked close with you, I can confirm that the work-life balance is still something we're working on. All right.
Yeah.
Anya, I'd like to invite you up to share your experience.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, everyone. And from the outside, although I've not had the pleasure of working with Tony extensively, I do know that you work very hard, and it is well known across the sector. So congratulations on all of that hard work. My name's Anya. I'm a senior policy advisor at the UK Committee for Unicef. There are 33 national committees at Unicef across traditionally higher income countries. They have historically been the offices that raise funds for UNICEF, but increasingly national committees are doing advocacy. And that's where I sit. So I sit within our advocacy team, and I do our policy advocacy on education and youth. And essentially what that looks at is finding out what challenges children are facing in accessing their education, identifying the policy or the lack of policy that might be causing those challenges, and then identifying a way to fix it. That's what I do in a nutshell, although day to day it often looks a lot like emails and report writing, but essentially that's what I'm hoping to do. And then what I do when we kind of are writing those briefings, or when we're looking at the opportunities to make change for children, we work with civil servants and those who write government policy in order to influence and inform what they'll be doing. And then I have fantastic colleagues who engage parliamentarians and the public in order to make more noise and create change on a broader scale. I work both domestically and internationally, so I have the very, very great pleasure of looking at education and supporting education for children here in the UK, as well as around the world, with our advocacy largely focusing on the UK government and the work that the UK government does in developing and supporting children around the world. And I do consider it a real pleasure to do that, and it's a unique opportunity. There are very few organizations that do both high income and low income education advocacy in one role and in the way that I work, and I really consider myself enormously lucky to do it. I always think that for us working in the sector, our key performance indicators are often around making change for children and driving a better world and the opportunities that we have been a part of, rather than driving revenue for stakeholders at the business level. And I think that's a real privilege, and I am very grateful for it. In terms of what I do specifically, or what I focus on specifically, I look at climate displacement and the impact that has on children's access to education. So we're looking at an increasing rise in numbers of people, including children, who are displaced as the world and its climate changes. And we explore how the UK government can be a part of supporting stronger education systems, and we work with our partners around the world to see what can be done to really ensure that no child goes through massive educational disruption as a result of climate change in the context of migration and displacement. So that's kind of what I do specifically now. How I got here. I've worked at a range of organizations and was shocked yesterday when I realized I've worked for 7 years in the sector. which probably doesn't sound like that many, but to me, I still think I'm like 2 or 3 years in. So that was quite a wake-up call. I've worked I've worked in health advocacy very briefly to start out with, and then I worked at the Open Society Foundation, looking at the role of private actors in education. And I met some of the wonderful people on the panel and Will there, which was a really wonderful experience. I had managed a children's essay competition, so went a little bit programmatic and a little bit different. And then I worked at the National Education Union, which is the largest teachers union in Europe. And I would highly recommend, if you aren't a teacher or have not been a teacher but are interested in education policy, to really ensure you're engaging with teachers unions as much as you can, and getting the voice of teachers within your advocacy and within your work, and ensuring that you see and understand their needs as people and not just as parts of an education system. And I think the most meaningful opportunity for me is always whenever I'm able to engage with children and young people and work with them to support our work. So last year, for instance, we facilitated a joint letter between the Youth Advisory Board of Unicef UK and the Youth Advisory Board of a refugee organisation here in the UK to talk about creating welcoming environments for all children. And it was really their letter, their output, and it was a real pleasure to be part of that, and I really enjoyed seeing kind of all of that come together. And any opportunity I have to learn from children is an opportunity that I very much welcome. So just to finish, because I want to make sure there's lots of time for questions as well, I have kind of 5 things that I have learned in my career so far, and that I wanted to reflect on. The first is to use your time in education as wisely as you can. So writing or volunteering or getting non-academic experience somehow. Working a part-time job is fantastic. I worked 3 jobs when I was at university, and managed 2 societies and was a student trustee, and basically didn't sleep apparently. But it was not to work that hard, of course, and take care of yourself. That's very important. But getting any kind of non-academic experience that you can, now's the time to do it. You have a full-time job, which is studying, and you can complement that with any other kind of experiences. And that's why I say everything is relevant. So if you coach a local football club, that's relevant. If you work in a fast food chain, it means you can engage with a variety of audiences and you can balance priorities. Everything is relevant, and appreciate that not everyone has the opportunity to do unpaid volunteering for an organization. Many of us, including myself, will have to have worked along the way, but that is incredibly relevant, and recognizing and valuing those opportunities as well. Asking for help, that's another one that I would recommend. I've always asked for help. Be curious, be insightful. Everyone, the worst that can happen if you reach out to someone is they just don't respond, because if they come back and say something unhelpful or unpleasant, then you didn't want to know them anyway, I think. And when it comes to career, you wouldn't want to work for them anyway. So just something to think about. Asking people whose careers, you're here today, that's great. If you see someone whose career you like, ask them how they got there. That's always quite flattering, I'm sure, for people who get asked that. Being passionate about what you do is the next one. Sharing that passion, being cause driven. Hopefully you're all here because you see the value of education and want to ensure that everyone has those opportunities to realize their right to education. Your cause can be broad, it can just be about helping people. But I think it's important to see this as an opportunity to make change for people and be really authentically driven by the change that you're trying to create and the better world that you're trying to build. And finally, if you're not learning, it's time for a change. And I think Anjela touched on this as well. It's one of the pieces of advice I received from a colleague when I was a bit nervous about taking on a new opportunity. And he was like, well, if you're not learning, what are you doing? And I've really taken that to heart. And that doesn't mean necessarily finding a new job, but it means asking for new opportunities within the one that you have, or seeking opportunities outside of the job that you have day to day. But also being a bit, if you can, and you have an opportunity to take a risk on a new job, even if it's a contract, if you have the opportunity to learn and build those skills, I think that's a really great chance if you're able to take it. But I'll stop there and looking forward to hearing from Sebastian and then from everyone on the panel.
All right, thanks, Anya. Really appreciate it. Sebastian, I'm going to invite you on to finish us off.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'll try to be brief so we can do some good Q&A. Yeah, I'll try not to repeat what others have said. So yeah, right now I've recently started a role at the Unesco Institute, International Institute for Educational Planning, just in January. And IAP is a part of Unesco that focuses on supporting ministries of education, particularly in education sector planning. I joined the crisis sensitive planning team within that. So my two main projects include, firstly, looking at how ministries of education can better incorporate and use humanitarian data in their education management information systems. So that's in Ethiopia and South Sudan initially. And the other one is looking at how humanitarian actors can better engage ministries of education to lead a response in the early stages of crises. So that's again, actually, yeah, same countries, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and other countries to follow. So yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment. Fairly circuitous path to getting here. Like Tony, I did a philosophy degree, then went abroad and spent a couple of years teaching. And during that time, I figured out this is the sector I wanted to be in. So I came back to the UK and did a master's at the UCL Institute of Education. Something I did during my master's which might be useful for you, is I switched to part-time as soon as I started to find work. So I'm not a very good student, and I was doing the master's so I could work in this sector, not because I was purely interested in the academic study, which is great for some, but not for me. And a reason I've avoided doing a PhD despite mostly doing research roles. But yeah, I switched to part-time as soon as I started picking up work, and then really focused on building the work. And I ended up taking like 3 years to finish my master's, and just did it part-time in the background. And something I realized is a lot of students, the hard bit about building this career is finding those initial roles. I think once you're established, I think it's quite easy to go from place to place. But finding those initial roles is really where a lot of people maybe end up working in a different sector or going back to what they were doing before. So, and it's quite a grey area. Not many places have entry-level roles that they publicly advertise. DFID has a graduate entry scheme, I think. Now FCDO. The GEM report, where some of us used to work, they have a scholarship scheme where they take early career researchers. And the work I initially got was through, firstly, my lecturers or just people I met, because I went to all the events I could. And they were generally, researchers, those kind of people, consultants, and I do 5 days here on a project, 10 days there on something else, and it would, slowly snowball. And then I did an unpaid internship at the Overseas Development Institute, and we can discuss that in Q&A. I was only able to do that because I could live for free with family in London, which is incredibly fortunate. And there's lots of pros and cons on doing an internship like that. But I did end up, working at the ODI for 3 years. So in my case, it definitely did work. That's not always, it doesn't always work out like that, but if you do end up doing an unpaid internship, be very aware that they owe you. So if they don't have work for you after you've completed, make sure you're using their networks and connections and they help you try and find work afterwards. After ODI, I worked at Save the Children for 2 years, again in a research role. And there was, an element of luck in getting that role. I applied for a role I definitely wasn't qualified to do, but I was interested in the team and the organization and the kind of work they do. I'd been a research assistant for 3 years and mostly on education emergencies, and applied for a role as an education policy and advocacy advisor in the education team. I hadn't done, some policy work in that the research you do advises on policy, but I wasn't a core policy specialist. I definitely hadn't done advocacy. I didn't really know what that word meant at the time. But I applied for the role anyway. And in the course of the interview, became aware that, they were aware of the work I'd done previously. They were interested in my research, but they didn't have capacity to do research and often took shortcuts to doing research in their team. So they actually didn't offer me the role, but they offered me a 6-month contract as a researcher in that same team, just to trial it out and see how it worked. And I ended up staying there for 2 years. So definitely encourage people to apply for jobs they're not qualified for. You never know what will happen. The same happened when I then moved to the GEM report. I applied for a finance research role. I wasn't an economist. I wasn't a finance specialist. I'd done some stuff on costing and financing for refugee education, but probably not to the level that they would have been expecting. But during that application process, the person who was writing the forced displacement chapter of the 2019 report on migration left. They needed somebody at quite short notice. They were aware I was interested in the organization and had done a lot on refugee education research at Save the Children. So they said, look, we don't want you for the finance role, thanks, but do you want to take this role? And that's how I joined them as a consultant for a year. So yeah, there's an element of luck, but also creating those opportunities. After the GEM report, I was a consultant for 2 years before joining the IEP. I actually found I had a lot more stability as a consultant and trying to find projects and working independently than I had previously. 3 years at ODI, 2 years at Save the Children. It sounds, like quite linear and stable, but actually in those 5 years, I had 13 different contracts. I was never on a full-time. No, I was employed full-time at those places, but I was never on a permanent contract. So there wasn't that stability. So consultancy can be a route to go down when you're more established. I hadn't realized that. I kind of ended up in it, but found I had more stability in that. Other ways to make those initial connections when you're transitioning from studying to work. I think dissertations are a huge opportunity, a huge missed opportunity a lot of the time. Like students put in a lot of time and effort into research that only a few people read. But if you can find an organization that doesn't have the research capacity, maybe it's somewhere like Save the Children or a smaller organization, they might have interesting data sets or questions they want answered, but just don't have the time to do. You could reach out, partner with them, say, I'm going to be writing this paper anyway. Is there something you would like answered? Is that interesting to me? Could we partner on it? Do you have data I could analyze? And that's a way of sort of building connections with an organization and getting experience, and then something you can talk about in interviews later. Definitely echo what people have said before about learning curves, and that's often been why I've moved jobs, is because I found myself in a comfort zone and been looking for something new. And I think there's 3 ways of looking at things you can offer organizations. There's the skills you have, the thematic knowledge you have, and your network. And you can prioritize them each to different degrees. So some people go heavily skill-based. They want to become, say, a monitoring and evaluation or data specialist. So then you have the same skills that you can offer, different sectors or different parts of the education sector. You might be particularly good at teacher training, that kind of thing, and you take your skills and do the same or similar thing at an increasing level at different places. You might want to develop thematic knowledge, so you have people who might be particularly focused on gender. For me, it's ended up being more education emergencies, particularly refugees. So I definitely think my thematic knowledge is definitely a lot of the reason why I'm brought in to do projects, more so than the skills, where I just have more sort of broad research skills. And then your network is really valuable, making those connections. And I think I've been really lucky to work for 3-4 different types of organizations as well, which has been useful. And I've engaged a lot in working groups, which are very collaborative spaces. So either it's been through the INEE, the International Network for Education in Emergencies, and GCPEA, the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. I had opportunities to work and contribute to their working groups, and that's another way to get involved with different organizations, see their projects, contribute your expertise, and just find out more. What else? Did I have anything else to add? Don't be demoralized. I've applied for a lot of things and just never heard back, and sometimes I've been definitely overqualified and thought, why didn't I hear back? But after being within organizations, I've seen, maybe around 30% of roles are advertised, but maybe they already know who they want for the role. It might be somebody internally who has to reapply for their role for a visa renewal reason, or they just prioritize people internally. So, if you don't hear back, don't worry about it. There's also, if I ever hear back, I always just tell myself it just went to somebody internally. It was a phantom role. So yeah, definitely create all those opportunities for yourselves. Reach out to people like others have said. And yeah, let's get to some Q&A. Happy to chat there.
All right. Thanks, Sebastian, and all of our panelists. I want to try to open up for questions, and hopefully we've got enough for maybe 2 rounds of questions, and it might go a little bit over. So I'll collect questions, maybe about 3 at a time, and open it up to the panelists. So at this point, if you've got questions, please feel free to raise your hand or add them to the chat box, and we'll try to grab the first 3. And then once we've heard from 3 people, we'll open it up for the panelists. So got a couple of hands up. Yeah. So Natasha, please introduce yourself, where you're from, and your question.
Hello. Thank you very much for the great panels. It was great to hear all sorts of different views. My name is Natasha, and I'm currently I'm a teacher, but I'm a career changer. So I had 5 years of experience, more or less, in international development and international security. And I've transitioned into teaching. And now I would like to transition and combine the teaching with the development experience, but in a kind of more on the ground role, in a sense. So I'm working, but I'm actually wondering, I mean, my dream is working for the UN. So I did an internship, but I'm particularly interested in Unicef and Unesco. And I'm just wondering, because I know that for the UN, it's really a lot about connections, but it's also a lot of early careers. So if you enter like when in your 20s, you're good. But for people later on in life, I think it's more difficult, as far as I've heard. I don't know what, maybe you could share your perspective, specifically those of you who are working for the UN system. Would love to hear. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Natasha. So we'll take questions also from Ellen, and then one more question after that. So, Ellen, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Hi, my name's Ellen van der Hoven. I'm currently a PhD student and research associate at the University of Glasgow in the School of Education. I actually have the opposite career trajectory from Natasha, in that I trained as a teacher in foreign languages and have since moved into the kind of education policy space, and with this PhD, education for development increasingly. And I had a question in relation to networking, which all of you mentioned as being kind of key, building those connections with different people, being able to understand the different institutions you might be interested in working in ahead of time. And it's the dreaded kind of COVID question in a way, but the way in which the move to online connection has changed networking, in some ways for the better, in that it's perhaps easier to attend events with people that you wouldn't normally get the chance to be in contact with all over the world. But also from my experience, that the connection has been considerably more shallow, because you don't have that in the room chatting before and after. Potentially there's food and drinks on offer or whatever it might be, and you kind of, the more informal conversations lead to much more meaningful connection. So any advice you have for networking in a context where I don't think this online format is going away regardless of what happens with the health situation?
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Ellen, for your question. And then, sorry if I get this name wrong. So Wenhao Wong?
Hello. Hi.
Welcome.
I am Wenhao Wang, and I'm 30 years old, and currently I'm doing research in the University of Glasgow. My research is relevant to the sports and exercise. And I've been working as a physical instructor and coach in China for 5 years. And I have plenty of experiences of working the local level and a national level. But now I would like to move on and working in the international level and helping the people to, especially the children and the people in need, to increase their health and well-being levels and health conditions, especially their psychological health conditions. So I would like, I think UNESCO could be a good place for me to achieve my dreams. And I would like to ask for the people who have the relevant experience in UNESCO about the job interviews. I kind of worry about job interviews in the UNESCO because I'm not sure what kind of qualities the people want to see. And I'm kind of curious about what are the interesting interview questions you were asked in the UNESCO. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to open it up. I see Alex has got his hand up, and I know we've got at least one question in the chat box, so that will come to the next round. I want to open it up to the panelists. You can feel free to address any questions that you think are pertinent. If you and you don't need to address any of this round if you don't want to. So I think we've got questions on how do you get into the UN, and we've got a lot of people with different experiences at different times in UN agencies. Yes. One on networking, and I would like to almost expand that a little bit with individuals that don't have a network. How do you get a network? And then especially during the COVID time, what might that look like? And then for the few that have been at UNESCO, a little bit on the process and the interviews around that. So who would like to get us started?
Can I go ahead and give some thoughts?
Yeah, Rosa, go for it.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the question. So the first one, I think it was whether it was possible to enter the UN after you are 20 years old. I mean, I think network is important, but it's more important what you have in your CV, the experience you have. So in my particular case, I entered UNESCO at the staff position without having a network at UNESCO at all. Like, I didn't know anyone. I wasn't even working exactly in education. I was doing labor and education, but all my experience up until then wasn't only education. So there are these cross-cutting abilities that I think are useful to develop. So in my case was that quantitative analysis. So I got a position as research officer focused on data. So yeah, I mean, and I was, how old I was? I was 30. So I mean, I got it after I was 20. The initial, I also did an internship at Unicef. The internships, I think, work more with the network, because it's just that you have to see what kind of need there is in a particular place. So I wanted to go and explore Thailand, and I got it through connections. But just that internship in staff positions, I think you have to rely more on what you have on paper, and don't be discouraged because you think there is no. You don't have a network in the UN, you're not going to get it. My advice will be to apply anyway, because you are not really sure who they are looking at, or like who are they looking for. So always apply. There is also, I mean, many cases where some of the positions are advertised, but they have identified someone inside. But it's not always the case. I would say it depends on the institution. So don't think also that they have already someone lined up. Always apply. And regarding how are the interviews, so the UN has a particular way of conducting interviews, or the processes for most of them, and this for the institutions that I worked for, UNESCO and UNHCR. You take a test, which is a technical test based on the terms of reference that were published for that particular position. If you make it through that cut, then you are shortlisted for an interview. And the interviews normally, it's normally 45 minutes, 1 hour interview. And the UN has these competency-based interviews that it's really easy to find. You just have to look online. It's competence-based interviews UN. So they ask you, like, they put you in situations, and then you have to answer how you will react in that situation. And then normally it's mixed with some technical stuff, so you have to be ready to answer to the situational questions, the competency-based questions, and to the technical questions. And the networking in these times of COVID, where everything is online, I think it has, of course, pros and cons. I mean, if you come from a place that it doesn't have as much access to these conferences and those things, I think it's a good opportunity, and I think it has kind of democratized the access to these different venues. I also know that people are tired, so now it's more difficult, for example, to just drop a line and have a quick call, but still I will encourage people reach out to people that work in institutions or that they have career paths that are interesting. So just drop a line, I don't know, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. There are people that are really open to talk to you, particularly to young people, so don't feel discouraged, always reach out. The worst that can happen is that you hear no or they don't respond to you, but the ones that they respond to you, it can be something really productive. Yeah, that's it. Over.
Okay, thanks, Rosa. Anyone else in the panel, especially on the networking piece, because I think there's different strategies to do this, on how to network effectively at this time, or on either the UN or UNESCO questions? Want to jump in?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So yeah, I typed some stuff in the chat. So INEE does global meetups for people interested in education emergencies. And these now happen online. They would have been in person. But yeah, I think organizing things yourself as students can be a really great way to do it. So myself and other students, we would organize events based on topics we were interested in, including these meetups, and invite the organizations we were interested in to come and speak, and then stay for drinks. Now it'd be virtual, but you can still do that. So we did events on education emergencies, on social entrepreneurship. So we haven't talked about the idea of starting your own initiative or organization, but there are people who do that if they have particular skills they can offer. And then with on the UN question, I mean I've ended up working in the UN. It wasn't like a targeted ambition. So I definitely think focus on building your skills, your thematic knowledge, and if the opportunity happens, then go for it. And yeah, definitely repeat what Rosa said. I think the interviews I've had have been very predictable in that they've definitely followed a pattern of asking questions regarding the competencies they highlighted in the job advert. And so generally the interviews that for me have gone best are ones where I've had examples where I've demonstrated those competencies written down and ready, so that I know if they ask about research skills or something, then I have 2 examples ready. If they ask about working well with others, you've got some examples ready. So just line up some examples for each of the competencies they ask for, and that should cover you for most of it. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay. Final, anybody else in the panel want to jump in on networking or UN?
Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Anya.
Sure. I was just going to say, I work for an NGO, but that is affiliated with Unicef. But I would say, being driven by wanting to work for the UN is slightly difficult. And I think your career path will be meandering, and so you might well end up at the UN, but there are lots and lots of other opportunities out there that I think it would be don't preclude yourself from seeking those opportunities in favor of the UN, because you might well end up there anyway, or you might well end up working closely with UN colleagues anyway. So just to kind of encourage you to look elsewhere as well. And then on networking, I completely agree with what Sebastian said, seeking those opportunities, creating those opportunities. If you do attend webinars and events, you can message people or make sure you're asking questions. People will often be interested in the question that you're asking. You can, if it's related to your thesis or your research, for instance, you can say, I'm researching this. And then some people might be interested in kind of following up and saying, oh, I'm really, I work in a similar field, or that's really interesting. And so that way you're kind of pushing yourself out there, even though, it's in a chat function.
Okay. Thanks. Tony, I think you get the last word on this, and then we'll get to one last round of questions.
Yep, just on networking, yeah, it is a changing landscape out there. It's not only for us as policy researchers or advocates, but ministries and aid agencies, and seeing the board of directors of some of these institutions like GPE and others. It's new for them as well. How do you get the board business done when you usually, outside the formal agenda, there's side meeting time, have some coffee, negotiations on the side and breaks and things like that. So it's been a struggle for everyone to figure out the virtual way of doing some of that business. But at the same time, I think as Rosa was also saying, there is this kind of democratized function of things are more on webinar. Maybe it's a link that more people can just dial into. And so many of the same rules of networking, I think, still apply, as you're hearing from Anya and others. What is that hook? You have someone that you see that your interest areas align. Maybe you listen to them on a presentation and you reach out to them afterwards and say, hey, I really enjoyed what you were saying about X, Y, and Z in that webinar. This is what I'm working on. So I think that those kind of connections just still apply. It's just more emails than maybe previously. But yeah, do continue to find ways to make those connections happen. It is a changing landscape out there.
Thanks. Yeah, the piece on democratization is interesting because we wouldn't be able to do this panel if we were trying to do this face-to-face. We've got panelists from at least 5 countries joining us today. So it's quite a unique experience for that. I want to get to our last set of questions. I know some people may have to head off. So if that's you, I understand, and I really appreciate your participation here. So I know you've got 2 more questions. Alex, are you still around?
Yep, I'm still around. Thank you for your presentations. I graduated from Will's program at Edinburgh last year, and I'm currently interning with Education Cannot Wait. And I'm wondering if any of you have any advice on how to leverage that experience of an internship and transition to a more full-time permanent position, whether that's in the same organisation, an NGO, or in the field, civil organisation, or if you've got any advice around that sort of theme, taking the next step. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And I know that Rona, you had a question in the chat box.
Hi, yeah, thanks everyone. That's really interesting. My name's Rona. I'm a PhD student in University of Glasgow in the School of Education. And we've been looking a lot at all the funding cuts that are going on at the moment. I'm just wondering if you see that as something specific to the UK, or if you're seeing cuts and reductions across the organisations you're familiar with, and if so, what are the implications for the kind of labour market for people like us, moving in to these changing landscapes? What will be the kind of priorities, and any suggestions on where the work's going to be?
All right. Thanks. And I've got, I think, all right, one final question from Oyemi. Sorry, probably messing that name up. So you just raised your hand. Oyemi Jakanika. Yeah. Welcome. Your microphone's cutting out a little bit.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
That's a little better, I think. Yes.
My name is Jack from University of Florida, Nigeria. And please.
No, we're not able to. Yeah,
Hello?
we're not quite able to get you. Maybe can you add your question to the chat box for us?
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello?
Yeah, hello. We can hear you bits and pieces, but
You hear me right? My name is Yemi from University of Florida, Nigeria. I'm a lecturer of comparative education. Oh,
Yeah, in your question.
Hi, everyone. Oh.
Sorry, we're getting pieces of you, but I don't know if you can hear us. So.
Hello. Hello.
So please add your question to the chat box. Okay. Sorry about the connection issues. If you could add your question to the chat box, we'll try to make sure that our panelists have an opportunity to respond. So as we're, so the question that's coming in the chat box will be the final question for this panel. We've got a couple questions that are out there so far on this time, including the impact of the current financial situation, so including the aid to education cut or aid cuts in the UK, but are there other financial constraints and what does that mean for the field? And then a practical question on looking at how do we go from an internship to a position? And hopefully we have one more coming and I'll share that out as we come along. But anybody want to get us started? As you're responding to these questions, also any final thoughts you have would be welcome.
Yeah, can I respond to the internship question?
Yes, go for it.
So I think you have to be strategic with the internship. Of course, it has to be something that you like, but it's wise if you have many opportunities to do internships to ask directly if they are open positions for that internship that you are doing. There are institutions that they are more open to this kind of transition from internship to a position within the organization. There are others that not. So try to choose those ones. If you want to stay in that organization, try to choose ones that have that path towards the staff position, because there are places where basically they are not opening positions. So try to be strategic about it. And regarding the funding of the UK, I really have no comment on that. But the final thoughts for me will be to take this opportunity that now we are more connected than ever to reach out to people, participate more or you are already doing it, probably participate in courses, in seminars to build your skills. And something that was important for me is that when I knew I wanted to get one particular job, I looked at the terms of reference required to that job. So I mean, normally women tend not to apply up until they have everything, all the skills there. But I would say just go ahead and do it. If there is some particular big skill that you think you have to build, take the time to build it. But normally apply, so take a chance on yourself. And I think that's it. Thank you very much for attending today. Over.
All right, thanks so much, Rosa, for joining us today. And we will continue with the rest of our panelists. Other responses to the internship to position or the impact of funding cuts?
So, taking off from where Rosa left, it doesn't need, yes, it's good to be strategic, but it needn't be also immediately in the place where you did the internship. It's useful to pick up the skill set, which might get you a job in another organization, if not the present one. And having interned in a place with a profile and demonstrated having worked in a place with demanding standards won't do you harm if you have to compare with someone who doesn't have that experience in another place as well. So be strategic, but not necessarily just in that place where you did the internship. Job cuts, well, it is an economic crisis. It's not just the ODA cuts, it's across all sectors. But fundamentally, in the end, once some organizations will continue to work, they will continue to hire. So therefore, yes, it's a bad patch, but it's a bad patch for all sectors in the global economy right now. So therefore, it's not that in my mind, it's not exceptional in that sense that this is a subsector which will be most affected.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So Huacong, Tony, or Sebastian, any final words or responses to the last two questions from you?
Well.
Yeah, go for it.
So for the internship, I think really depends on institution. So for the institution and the workforce, so some institution definitely doesn't have the financial capacity to hire interns afterwards. And some institution does have some room or space to negotiate. I think when you are doing your internship, it's probably best to find out that information as early as possible, to talk with your mentors. Even if the institution doesn't have the financial capacity to hire you as a permanent employee, but still the experience of being an intern will lead you to some other opportunities. So don't afraid to reach out to people. Yeah, like Rosa said earlier. Yeah, what else? About the networking, I think even before COVID time, I was reached out a couple of times through LinkedIn. So people would reach out, ask for advice. I think usually, like a few colleagues just mentioned, yeah, so usually people are willing to answer your questions. So don't be afraid to reach out to people, yeah.
Thanks, Huacong. Tony, Sebastian, I think you may both be around.
Yeah, on the internship thing, yeah, that's interesting because that's how I got started. I think what you notice is there's quite high turnover in the sector, so people do move around jobs quite often. So even if you're doing an internship for quite a short period, if you can really get on, spread across quite a few projects and make it so that if somebody leaves, you are the next best place to take over the role, that can be a really good approach. So, when I was at ODI, I took on quite a few different things and made it so it would be kind of a problem if I left, because suddenly they'd be losing a lot of capacity that they'd built up. If it's very clear that they can't keep you on, they just can't afford it, it's a small organization, but it was a useful experience for you, then they do owe you. So definitely sort of lean on them to help find you opportunities, to set you up with people, to connect you with people, to set up conversations, look out for roles, those kind of things. And check the policies as well. There are places that have paid internships. They do exist. And also, once you're in organizations, try and make sure that all internships are paid. We shouldn't be dealing with unpaid internships at this stage. And yeah, the UN is a big question mark. I didn't consider doing one at the UN because it's far too expensive to live in the cities where they have head offices. And I don't think you're even allowed to work for that UN institution for at least 6 months after completing an internship. So it's deliberately stopping people gaining an advantage from having this internship. So it might be useful to start building a network, but I'm pretty sure it won't lead to employment, at least in the short term, which might be an issue for people. So yeah, definitely think strategically if you're gonna do one. Yeah, but otherwise, yeah, great to see familiar faces. Nice to see you, Will. Thanks for inclusion. And yeah, if people have follow-up questions, yeah, do reach out. Happy to answer stuff.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Sebastian. Tony, any final words from you?
Yeah, I was just smiling over here, agreeing with Sebastian on the interning. Yeah, trying to find an internship of substance and one that allows you to effectively build yourself into the core work of that organization, and whereby after that internship, of course, they would not want to lose you because there's core pieces of that work that you are specifically really qualified for supporting. So that's an excellent route there. And also with that, being on the lookout for those substantive internships, of course. Many times internships might just be very related to kind of lower level tasks and things that are a bit less permanent. So do try to find one of substance that would allow that. Yeah, that's similar to some of my experience years ago on the internship front. So very good conversation. Thank you from my side for welcoming me to this excellent conversation, and we hope that it helps everyone's journeys in front of you here. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all. We're gonna I want to remind everybody quickly that this is the second of 2 panels. If you missed the first one, I will share the recording link in the chat box so you have access to the first panel if you're interested in going back and hearing from 6 different experts. To end, I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. The pandemic actually brought us all together here, and it's amazing to see a little bit of a reunion here. I haven't seen many of you for quite some time, so it's been great to hear what you're all up to. Thank you for sharing your experience and your time. Really appreciate it. I also want to thank our event planning team here and the Comparative Education International Development Community at the University of Edinburgh. So Linji, Chuyi, Yongyao, Vivian, Chun for helping me put this together. And once again, if you want to hear more about what we're doing as a community, please check us out on our website or follow us on Twitter. So big thank you for everybody for joining us today. I hope the rest of your day, night, morning goes well wherever you might be. And yeah, thanks to all the panelists. So really appreciate it, and signing off now. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, Will. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.